beer tax, no dice rolling, and you better not be late for church. Welcome to the Dark Ages. Here are 10 bizarre medieval laws peasants were forced to follow. Starting off, we are talking about the beer standards. Laws regulating the quality and price of bread and beer were common in the medieval era. If you want to make beer, that's great, just make sure it doesn't taste like shit. Failure to comply with these specific standards could result in fines, imprisonment, or even harsher punishments like pillory. These laws protected consumers from dishonest practices, but they also placed a heavy burden on the small-time peasant brewer, whose livelihood depends on harvests and grain prices. Every medieval baker would anxiously be measuring their flour and water, fully aware that any miscalculations could cost them their lives. Next, we are talking about no bow, no arrow. In medieval England, the Assize of Arms of 1181 required every man to own weapons according to his wealth, but this law had a very bizarre twist for peasants. They were often forbidden from owning swords or crossbows. Instead, peasants were typically allowed to only bear a simple bow and arrows. This regulation was designed to ensure the peasant class couldn't rebel effectively against the gentry or royalty, but it also ensured every village could provide basic soldiers for the king's armies. Imagine the life of a peasant crafting his own bow from yew wood, constantly reminded of his place in society by the weapons he could legally wield. In medieval Scandinavia, laws about brewing beer were quite strict. A peasant woman who brewed must host a communal feast using her beer, but if she failed to brew for 3 consecutive years, she risked losing her marital rights. TikTok, lady. This law reflected the communal nature of medieval villages where brewing and sharing beer was not only a social practice, but also a regulated one, ensuring that everyone contributed to the village festivities. What a fun time, I guess. It was sort of like having a block party all the time. Hopefully you have nice neighbors with good taste. Under the strict sumptuary laws of the Middle Ages, peasants were often required to dress according to their social status, particularly on Sundays and holy days. Don't dress for the job you want, dress for the one you have. These laws prevented peasants from wearing clothes that imitated the nobility, like fur trimmings or silk. On Sundays, a peasant donning unauthorized apparel could face fines or even public humiliation. That would already be such an embarrassing situation to be in, and now you're telling me you're gonna publicly shame me? This town sucks. Yeah, like you're already embarrassed, you're like, oh, she's wearing the same fur as me, and then what more humiliation do you need, you know? Medieval peasants were frequently prohibited from playing certain games, especially those involving gambling or those deemed too violent by the local nobility. In 13th century England, games like dice, which could lead to disputes and violence, were particularly frowned upon. They take off heads publicly, but God forbid you play a little Yahtzee. These laws aimed to maintain public order and ensure that peasants spent their spare time on productive labor rather than frivolous or disruptive activities. So crazy. Just sounds like an absolutely horrible, boring time. In medieval England, the church ale was a type of local fundraiser where peasants brewed and sold ale to raise money for church repairs and festivities. How nice of everybody to do that for them. The thing is, participation wasn't exactly voluntary. Failure to contribute to the church ale could result in fines or public penance. This very bizarre law blended spiritual obligation with community duty, showcasing a direct method of taxation that also served as a bit of a social function. Interesting strategy for sure. Since we're talking about the medieval church already, let's talk about some penalties one would receive for bailing on the God Squad. Church attendance was of course not optional in medieval times. Missing mass could lead to fines or even death, which seems a bit extreme. 0 to 100 real quick. This law ensured that religious observance remained at the center of daily life, but it also served as a control mechanism, keeping the population engaged with the teachings and authority of the church. Like, what if you were sick? Okay, did you still have to go? I don't know, it just seems like forcing people to go might make them not want to. It's just like a little bit of reverse psychology here. During the medieval era, peasants often faced legal restrictions on when they could harvest their crops. In some regions, the harvest had to begin on a specific day declared by the lord, supposedly to ensure fairness and order, but often it served to reinforce the lord's control over the peasants' time and labor. Imagine the frustration of peasants watching their crops ripen to perfection, yet unable to harvest them until the lord gave the word. I personally would be quite frustrated, and there's nothing you can do about it because it's the Dark Ages. What a brutal time to be alive. Top 10 worst times to be alive, for sure. That in the year like 535 or whatever it is. It's just a 1 year where they were like, this one's real bad. Perhaps one of the most infamous and controversial medieval laws was the lord's right to spend the first night with a peasant bride. Although the historical accuracy of this practice is debated among historians, it was believed to have been enforced in some places. This law was a severe intrusion into personal lives of peasants, symbolizing the extreme power lords held over peasants. This sounds like a law some freak made up on the spot. He was like, yeah, for sure, I feel like I got first dibs. It's a little creepy. In later medieval periods, a window tax was imposed, where peasants had to pay taxes based on the number of windows or the size of openings in their houses. God forbid you want a little bit of sunlight for your pothos. This bizarre tax was essentially a form of income tax, as having many windows was a sign of a larger, more affluent home. To avoid this tax, many peasants would brick up their windows, leading to dark, poorly ventilated homes. Oh, taxman is coming, better brick up your windows. Like, what? This town absolutely sucks. That also reminds me of a debate we were having a little while ago here at the office. Are there more doors or wheels in the world? A gear? If we're counting all forms of wheels, it's definitely wheels. But like an office chair? Buddy, that's like the octopus of the wheel world. Like, that's crazy. So yeah, let me know down below in the comments. That's how I know if you're actually watching the video. Marriage permissions were a significant aspect of the feudal control lords held over their peasants during the medieval era. Under this system, peasants were required to seek and obtain their lord's approval before they could marry. This policy was not merely a form of social oversight, but a strategic measure to manage the economic and political dynamics within the lord's domain. The requirement served multiple purposes. It allowed the lord to prevent unions that could lead to the accumulation of land or wealth among peasants, God forbid, potentially forming powerful familial alliances that could challenge the feudal hierarchy. Additionally, by controlling marriages, lords could ensure that the agricultural labor force remained within their control, as marriages often meant the redistribution of small plots of land and the alignment of labor resources. For peasant couples, this requirement was a reminder of their lack of agency. Young lovers had to put their personal happiness and future plans on hold, pending the decision of a lord who might base his approval on economic or strategic interests rather than the personal well-being of his serfs. If you thought Romeo and Juliet had it hard, I don't know, man. This sounds pretty tough. Alright, well, that was some bizarre medieval laws that peasants were forced to follow. I think it's safe to say that they were not having a good time. I don't think I would be having a good time if I had to follow all of these rules, but maybe that was just, you know, it's what they knew, they were used to it, but I don't think they were having a good time. That's my personal take on this. I've been your host today, Olivia, and I will see you again very soon. Goodbye. See you later. Ciao. Ooh-wee. All right. What's up? You were expecting someone taller and skinnier, weren't you? All right, but you got me instead. Jump scare. Okay.